And a really warm welcome to Magpies board member Jodie Sizer. Jodie, thank you so much for coming along on a really special week for football. Can you tell us how your love affair with the game and in particular the Black and White Army began?
G'day, thank you so much for having me. It is a very exciting week this week. My love affair began, like many, as a child, being taken along to the football games, and for me, of course, that was Victoria Park. And my stepdad, absolute passionate Pies supporter, would take my brothers and sisters and myself off to the games to enjoy a weekend of footy.
Tell us more about your parents. Your stepdad obviously was that love of Collingwood and footy, but tell us about your mum and dad as well.
Absolutely mad, hardcore, one-eyed Pies supporter, and really it was a great opportunity to be together as family. I think sport forms a massive part of many of our families' weekends. But Mum, my dad, my actual dad, was from Framlingham, Goodridge-Mara Japperong man, and he's a Carlton supporter, in fact. And of the 5 of us kids, we're all Collingwood bar one, my brother. So I don't know if he'd see that as a success, but I think you do undertake that brainwashing process with your kids, and I'm sort of midway through mine with my 3 daughters. My dad, absolute hardcore advocate and staunch supporter of progressing Aboriginal rights, and I think that's what's got my blood pumping from my rights perspective. But my mum, such an incredible woman in raising the 5 of us kids, and incredibly hardworking and the most beautiful human I know on the planet. So I've got to say that's rubbed off in some ways for me, and the way I approach my motherhood and just the way I approach my working role.
And you've spoken before about your desire to create change. So who's responsible for planting that seed in you? Where does this desire come from?
Well, I think that's in part definitely my dad, that fight for anything that's unjust and a better future, and acknowledging that the past is not okay and the future has to be different. I think that does take a different turn when you become a parent, and the future of your kids and your kids' kids becomes part of your role in creating a legacy for them. That's certainly the legacy that my dad has brought for me, and really taking the struggle to the next level and fighting some of the really hard roads and really incredible paths that they've trod to bring us to the table today.
So you talk about truth-telling. Tell us what that means to you and how important it is.
Well, unfortunately, I think that there's a time in our history within our, schooling years where Australia hasn't been really comfortable with talking about the history of Aboriginal Australia and colonisation and settlement. But and we didn't have that as part of our curriculum within our school programs. So when we talk about truth-telling, it's about having a conversation about the past and how that does impact today, and understanding that there is a direct connection between the past injustices, the impacts of policies, and how Aboriginal Australia is positioned today from an economics and social status.
How has it impacted you in your life? Have you experienced a lot of racism coming through as a kid, and now in such an experienced and great woman in this game and in the corporate world as well?
Well, I think absolutely that it does inspire me, and that you can have experiences in life and be able to, want to do something about that to change it. But there wouldn't be an Aboriginal person in Australia that hasn't experienced racism. And whether it's in an education forum, for me at university, experienced racism through primary school, in workplaces, that racism exists in almost every space that you look to, that whether it's my dad standing there waiting to be served at a cafe, or sometimes it's casual racism, and in today's day and age often that is the case, and it's in some spaces now it's not acceptable, and there is a response when people have direct racist comments, but we certainly see it still alive and well. One of our senior elders was running for election over in a small community in South Australia, and his poster's up in the community, and people have written "Kill all Abos" on his poster. That's a couple of weeks ago. So there'd be a long list of examples that if we opened a forum, people could share exactly what they're about, but it's definitely alive and well.
Jodie, did you ever play footy at all as a youngster?
No, it seemed to be that the boys played footy and the girls went that way and played netball.
So you've got 3 young girls now, all at primary school. Do they play footy?
It's a different time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really exciting. So just this year, my daughter, who's in grade 5, I've got a grade preppy, a grade 2, and a grade 5 11-year-old, and so she was able to play girls footy.
Are you jealous? Do you watch her play with jealousy?
She was so proud and they were so tough to get out there on the field and really have a go that I would love to have had the chance to kick a footy.
And you're an accountant and auditor by trade and also a massive Magpies fan. Have you crunched the numbers already this season? Can the Pies make it to another grand final, do you think?
Make it and win it. There's no question about that.
Numbers are your expertise, so I had to ask you that one.
Absolutely. The numbers are, in the toolkit, but the passion is that using those tools to enable business and economic development and community development. So it's exciting to bring those skills to the Collingwood table.
Well, Jodie, we've got so many more questions for you and some really big topics to discuss after the break, so stay with us on The Mark. Well, we are talking footy now with Jodie Sizer. And Jodie, we need to touch on the Adam Goodes documentary, which is certainly making a big impression at the moment in the football community. You watched it last night. What were your takeaways?
So incredibly powerful. It really confirms the power of the arts to tell a story. And it's a story that absolutely has to be told. So I was really lucky to have that opportunity to have a preview. As much as my takeaways was just how incredibly inspired I was by Adam and how courageous and strong he is as an Aboriginal leader and being able to continually stand up and call out racism and have that conversation time and time again. And at not one point did he lean back from calling out what it is. And it's really quite, challenging and exhausting at times to continue to stand up, to be questioned and criticised and challenged continually on a day-to-day or a weekly basis. But so proud of him, inspired to take that conversation forward, but also heartbreaking in the end because I could see the toll that it had worn down on him and his mum call out for people to cease and that still not be responded to in the right way, that you could see it physically take its toll. And I just thought overall, for a man who has given so much to the game, an Australian of the Year, that All-Australian player, George Brownlow medalist, such a champion to, contribute so much to a game and have the game treat him the way in which it did is such a shame and should never happen again. We
can see through the emotion with you're speaking with that it's painful for you to relive. I figure it's probably going to be painful for most of us to relive and sit through and watch this documentary because the way he left the game still makes my blood boil. At the time there was controversy over, whether it was racist or not. In your opinion, was it racist?
Absolutely. I bet you would hear people like Tanya Hosh, who was in an article last year saying she's continually frustrated at how non-Indigenous people will determine what racism is or not. That
they tell you.
We know what it is. We're experiencing it every day. Absolutely it was racism. There's never been an example in history, has there?
So how do we make sure that it never ever happens again?
Well, I think that's where we do need to have a conversation as a sporting industry and the game as a whole to say how do we take leadership on this for the benefit of all of Australia, to say that this is something, racism is something that does take place in our sporting fields, across the code, across our workplaces and our education institutions, that understanding it, truth-telling is part of that and our history, but really most importantly taking action, that we might have 80 talented players, which has come a long way in the many decades, but where are we at on Aboriginal coaches? Where are we at? We're at Collingwood really proud to have an Aboriginal board member, a female Aboriginal board member, one of the few that have across the country and the only in Victoria, but we need to shift the dial on some of those other metrics to really move through what we need as transformational change, and that's when we know it's going to be different, not just a tick-off exercise.
Do you remember how you felt when he did that goal celebration? And that was really the height of it. Because I sit there and I watch it and I think, what an awesome celebration. But the response to it, just as Kel said, it broke your heart. How did it make you feel in that moment, everything going on?
It's just unbelievable to think that an Aboriginal man wearing a jumper designed by his Aboriginal mum in the Indigenous round can't do a traditional dance, and just how the public responded to that. Not everyone, but the pockets that were significant enough. We all heard the sound and how strong that was. I wonder how it would have compared to the MCG on Anzac Day, but it was significant and it had a massive impact. For me, it's just a reminder of how this plays out in the public spotlight of what we experience every day. And it's such a shame because the opportunity is incredibly huge. If we look at our Maori brothers and sisters, where a nation can speak an Aboriginal language in which we have all people on the sporting field performing the haka, the Maoris and the non-Indigenous players, and it's just part of, it's a strengthening part, it's a celebrated part, it's something that they are all proud of, and the opportunity is there for us as a country to get to that place. We'll start with truth-telling, we follow up quickly with action, and we'll see a significant change.
So we're seeing a lot at the moment, things being called out on social media. Yes. Where do you sit on because we used to say don't give oxygen to it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now we call it out. Where do you sit on that? What's the right thing to do in your mind?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I would say call it out. Because what we're seeing is people are calling it out in the grandstands and saying that's not okay. And if we're seeing it in workplaces, that people shouldn't have to turn up to work and be racially vilified or harassed in any form, whether it is from their peers or from their clients or from the community, from the fans, from the supporters. It's got to be a safe place to be our best and to be celebrated. So, and then we together standing side by side.
Collingwood doesn't have a great track record when it comes to racism. If you have a look in recent years, Herdia Lumumba left the club disillusioned. He made claims that he was called a chimp by former teammates. And then, of course, Collingwood was all caught up in the whole Adam Goodes saga, given that the game was against Collingwood. When you decided to become a board member, did you have to have those tough conversations with the other board members and just clear the air? I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But I can't imagine that you would have just joined and been happy with what's happened in the past.
No, that's right. Well, anyone who knows me from the community knows that I'm not there to rubber stamp something, and we're absolutely motivated by impact and change. So I was fortunate to have a role with the club in supporting the Reconciliation Action Plan Advisory Group, which was half a dozen Aboriginal leaders within the community who had come together with each of the departments of the club to say, what do we want to do? What does action look like for the club? So that's been 2 years of work, and in fact we'll launch that stretch wrap next week, which does chart our course of the club. In that conversation, when the Lumumba conversation was live about 2 years ago now, I reached out to Debbie Lovett, who's the Aboriginal Programs Manager, and I said to Deb, knowing you're a staunch, strong community leader, we've been in spaces where we know that racism is either accepted or ignored. I need to know from you, from my experience and my exposure, I think I know what the answer is, but I need to know from you that it's absolutely not tolerated and not something that's just considered a norm or allowed to happen or even encouraged. And she was absolutely firm, 100%, that that's not the case. And we had a meeting that day of the RAP group, and she reached out to Eddie, and to his credit, he came within 2 hours and addressed the group, and we had that direct conversation with him, and the answer was the same. That we know it's hard being a black fella and barracking for Collingwood at times. That, you know, it's from the chapter with Nikki Winmar and Michael Long, and we come to celebrate the long walk this weekend. We just stem from that time and the comments that Alan McAllister said. That you know, I'd like to think that we've learnt from that, and hopefully at a point in time, we as Australia can say that it's not Aboriginal people that should be more like white people and things will be okay. That there's so much that we can learn from our culture and be proud of, and I see that narrative changing. I see this as an opportunity to have that conversation, and I'm excited that we as a club can lead that.
Well, Jodie, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story. You're certainly a trailblazer in the Indigenous community, and as a female board member, such an important role you have to play in our game, and thank you. Enjoy the Sir Doug Nicholls round. It's going to be superb.
Thank you so much, you too.